from teaching others to feeding others and a lot of things in between. Stick around and we'll talk about that and how God can use us in different ways for His glory. Welcome to the Here at Home podcast, a podcast about the people here at McGregor, their stories, their ministry, and their love for Jesus. My name is Mark Bricker, and if this is your first time to the show, welcome. And if you're enjoying the Here at Home podcast, I would encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. That way you'll get each new episode delivered right to your podcast player. So join me in welcoming our guest for today's podcast, Bob Fain. So glad to have you on the show, Bob.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's good to be here.
Yeah. And first of all, are you a podcast listener yourself?
Not yet, but I will be.
Not yet. That's funny. People that are on the show that never have listened to podcasts before, all of a sudden, hey, they take an interest in it. So we'll be glad to have you join our podcast community. Let's get started by letting our listeners get to know you a little bit, because I've known you ever since I came here almost 22 years ago. So I know you a little bit, but a lot of folks listening might not know who Bob Fain is. So let's go all the way back to the beginning. Where were you born, Bob?
In the dark ages. I was born in Norwich, Connecticut, but it wasn't my fault.
Norwich, Connecticut.
Yeah, Mom and Dad moved down to Fort Myers when I was in first grade, and came across the old Edison Bridge and stopped at a gas station, and my dad was pulling a trailer. And he's asked the guy at the gas station, where can I park this thing? And he pointed out towards Tice, and he said, there's a trailer park out there. And so we went out and we stopped at that trailer park, and that's where I grew up. Went to Tice Elementary School, and then Orange River Elementary School, and then Lee Junior Senior High School, and then Fort Myers High School, and then Edison Junior College for 2 years.
So you really grew up in this area then?
Yeah, I'm a homeboy.
Born in Connecticut, but pretty much
raised here.
Raised here. And a lot of those same schools you were mentioning, my wife went to. Because she grew up out in East Fort Myers as well. So a lot of that is very, very familiar.
Yep.
Well, tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah. Happily married to Marcia. Marcia was a math teacher at Colusa Middle School, and I was a science teacher.
How long y'all been married now?
We were married in 1979. So do the math.
Like 42 years?
Yeah, thereabouts.
Okay. Yep. Something like that.
Yep. And we have 2 kids, 2 children, a boy and a girl. When we were married, we started to try and have children, and the doctor said it just wasn't going to happen. And then Marcia got pregnant with Callie, and so that was like a miracle baby. And when Callie was born, she was a preemie. She was 3 pounds 6 ounces when she was born. Wow. And they gave us all the bad news about what could happen. It turned out she just was a beautiful baby, and now she's a beautiful woman here with her own children.
That's right.
And then 2 years later, we had a son, Corey, and Corey was not premature. He was 12 pounds 3 ounces.
He turned out to be a big boy.
He came out bouncing a ball. He was just that athletic to start with, and so we had extremes for the children. And both of them have grown up here in this area. They're both natives. And Callie's now teaching first grade at Diplomat Elementary School. Married to a wonderful young man. He's not young anymore. Married to Luke, and he is also a teacher. He's a 6th grade math teacher at Diplomat Middle School. Corey has been working in a coffee ministry for quite some time from Guatemala, but recently he had been working at an exterminator's office at Irvin Pest Control, and they were bought out by another company, and Corey decided it was time to step out on his own, so we went through all the tests and certifications. So now he's got his own extermination company called Pest Fix. I call them. They're good. And
is he no longer roasting coffee?
He's still roasting coffee, and he was doing that with Riverside Baptist.
Right, yeah.
And he taught some of the young people down there about how to be baristas and how to do the mixes and the coffees and all that stuff. And he does all the fancy designs, but he really starts with the green coffee coming from Guatemala and then roasts it all up and everything. And since it's gotten a little bit bigger now and he's getting really busy with the exterminator company, then he's having somebody else do the roasting, so he's had to delegate some of that out. And God led him into a lot of neat ministries through that. Now, and he spent 6 months in Guatemala as a missionary and got to work with some really poor indigenous people in that area, but with one just outstanding missionary down there who is an American citizen, but he has dual citizenship there. Yeah. And Corey learned a lot from him. And he's married to Olivia, who was raised here at McGregor. And they have one daughter, that's Bryn Lee, and she's just a charmer. She's a sweet little girl. She and my youngest grandson are both within about a month of each other, so they're about roughly a year and a half old. And then Callie's oldest boy is Hunter, and he's four and a half now.
Growing up. So 3 grandkids keep you busy, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
I know you love that. What are some of the things you enjoy doing when you're in your spare time?
I ride a bicycle a lot. I have a e-bike now. I've got a Himaway electric bike that I ride. I started doing that a year and a half ago after a heart attack that I had. I had the heart attack while I was on the bicycle. And I walked the bike home and thought I just overheated and called the ambulance, and I ended up having 3 stents put in. But after that, Marcia and I talked about it, and I said, maybe it's time for an e-bike. And so now I've got a throttle so that I can pedal as much as I want, and then when it gets a little too hot or a little too far, I can twist the throttle. And it's got pedal assist, so that if I'm pedaling, it's helping. Or I can just coast and turn that throttle and do about 24 miles an hour back home if I want to.
Nice.
So that worked good. And I fish a little bit.
I've heard you talk about fishing a little bit. Yeah. Awesome. Well, one of the things that I wanted to have, the main reason I wanted to have you on the podcast is just as I do for almost everybody that comes on, is to give them a chance to share a little bit of their story, specifically God's story in their life, because really our lives are really His story. And I want you to start by sharing how you first came to know Christ, because that's a fascinating part of your story. And then we'll just kind of move through that progression. And I teased earlier about from teaching to feeding, and we'll get to some of the vocational things and the ministry things as well. But let's go back to when the Lord first began dealing with you.
He started dealing with me a long time before I realized it. When we moved from Connecticut down to East Fort Myers, Mom and Dad started going to Tice Methodist Church. And being in a Methodist church, I was taught to be a good boy and to do what Mom and Dad said, and to be quiet in church, and to be the best I could be. And that's what my dad especially taught me. He said, be a good boy, be better than other people. And so that was my goal. And while I was in high school, one of my friends invited me to a Youth for Christ rally at Terry Park out in East Fort Myers, a big tent meeting. It was a revival. And I went to that tent meeting, and that was the first time that I heard a fire and brimstone preacher talk to me and tell me that I was a sinner, Mark. And I was offended. I was deeply offended to hear that I was a sinner, because I was always told that I was to be a good boy and the best I could be.
You hadn't heard that before.
Had not heard that before. And so that's where the conviction started, but it was like a slow seed to grow. And so anyway, I went on through high school and then college. And after college, I was living out in East Fort Myers, and I was riding a bicycle in my neighborhood, and I was coming home. And one of my high school friends lived down the street from me, and she and her husband. And Sandy was out in her front yard, and so I saw her, and I waved, and she waved, and she asked me to stop. So I stopped, and she just chatted back and forth, and she said, I want to ask if you would be interested in coming to church with us Sunday. And I said, yes. And both of us were really surprised. She didn't expect anybody to say yes, and I don't really know why I did. So anyway, I went to that church, and it was a small church just getting started. It was part of Riverside Baptist, but a mission church out on Ortez Avenue. And I went to that church, and that's where I really started being under conviction. And the preachers out there really were laying the gospel out to me, and I had never heard it before. Wow. When we were at the other church, we would read some scripture, and then we'd go off and talk about being a good person, and really never connected any of that together. And so because of Sandy, I started going to that Baptist church, and that's where I started getting under conviction. And I was at the point where I guess I was going to be saved.
You were close.
I was close. And then I guess Satan looked at me and he said, I don't want to lose this one. I'm going to double up on him. And things started happening, and I really I didn't drift away. I turned and chugged away from the Lord. And it was like, I don't know why. I don't know what happened, but I just was totally pulled away from the Lord. And I didn't want to hear anything about it. And I was teaching at Calusa Middle School, and one of the other teachers that was there was named Marcia. She was a math teacher. And we ended up falling in love with each other, and we ended up getting married. And before we got married, we were talking about our future life coming together, and we decided we really needed to get a good church to connect with, and that little Baptist church was still ringing back there in the back of my head. And so I started asking some of my friends, where's a good Baptist church? And we were both living way over in Cape Coral at that time, and actually I was living on Pine Island, and she was in Cape Coral. And so anyway, somebody mentioned to us McGregor Baptist Church, this little church on McGregor Boulevard. And so that next Sunday after that, we both went to McGregor, and we haven't left. We're still here. And,
what year was that?
Man, you ask me hard questions with the numbers. We got married in 79, so it must have been 77, 78, something like that. Jim Holbrook was the preacher.
Right.
And so we had him, he actually married us, and we went through counseling with him, and I still remember him telling us, good advice about being married. That's not 50-50, it's 100%. If you're on one side and your marriage partner's on the other side, and you're both working toward Jesus, you're getting closer together. Thank you, Jim. And so that really helped us establish a good, firm basis for our marriage. And then he married us at that building. I tell people now we were married at the Salvation Army building, but that's where it was.
And that's what it is now.
And so we started teaching Sunday school classes.
Well, let's back up a little bit, because up till this point, when your story, you were running from the Lord, but you started going to church. So what happened? What changed there?
God didn't change, I did.
Yeah.
But just being under conviction and then listening to Jim Holbrook's preaching, it was like I realized that I need to make a stand. I needed to make a change in my life that was going to be a big enough change that other people would see it, know it. And so I talked to Marcia about it, and I said, I need to go forward in church. I need to commit my life publicly, to Christ. And gosh, it tears me up here. But I decided to do that. And so one Sunday there at McGregor in the old building, when it came to the end of the church service, there was an altar call, and I let go of that pew in front of me. There were fingerprints in it. And I walked out into that aisle, and I walked forward, and I just felt like I was freed up. That I'm sure the angels were singing. But I walked forward, and I told Pastor Jim, I said, I want to be saved. And so he led me through the sinner's prayer, and we did all that. And at that point, I became truly saved.
Truly saved, yeah.
That being under conviction lasted a long time. But it wasn't until I heard him preaching and really hearing that true gospel message. And that was where I decided, okay, it's not up to my mom and dad. It's not up to my good grandmother. It's not up to my friends. I have to make a decision for myself. And I decided to follow Christ.
Amen. And that really is a beautiful picture of that moment where we realize we are a sinner and we can't save ourselves. Yeah, we can by faith choose to follow Him, but it's Him that does the saving, and we turn from our sin and put our faith and trust in Him.
And that was a big cultural change for me, because I'd always been taught to stand on your own, do your own thing. God is my co-pilot? No. I want God to be my pilot.
Amen.
And that was a big cultural change for me from what I had been taught, what I grew up with, for the culture that I grew up in, to give up myself and take Him on. Let Him lead me to do that.
And that, in some ways is kind of sad, because you had grown up going to church. And a lot of people have grown up going to church. And they'll never hear the true gospel message of what Christ has done for them. It's not what they can do to earn God's favor or earn God's acceptance. It's only what Christ has done for them. And I'm grateful for a lady by the name of Sandy
Musselman,
that got out of her
husband after she got married.
Got out of her comfort zone, right? To ask you and invite you to church.
And that's something any one of us can do, is to ask one of our friends, want to come to church with me? But don't be surprised when somebody says yes, and it changes their life.
Exactly. And I think that's such a good point, because we talk about that here at McGregor about how important it is to invite people to come to church. Obviously, we want to get the conversation to the gospel eventually, but sometimes it starts with that first invite. Hey, why don't you come to church with us? Why don't you come to life group with us? And I'm grateful for you that Sandy took the initiative and did what was not comfortable for her. And I'm sure you've been reminded that many times when you've invited people to come to church.
Yep. I don't always get yeses.
Yeah. Oh, no. I'm going to get a lot of no's, but we're not doing it for the yeses or the no's.
Right.
We're doing it to be faithful and obedient to God. So I'm grateful for that. I'm also grateful for somebody at the church that you've started going to with Sandy took you to that was preaching the gospel, that you began to come under conviction, even though you fought it for years. And then ultimately to be at McGregor.
It was a good seed that was planted.
Right.
It just took a while to get the right watering.
And then to hear the gospel as Pastor Jim preached it, and to come under the conviction of the Holy Spirit and to give your life to Christ at that point.
You don't hear that term under conviction very much, but it's something that people go through. If they're really developing from a non-believer, an unbeliever, maybe even never ever hearing, so not knowing the difference, to the point where they're really a follower of Christ. Mm-hmm. You've got to go through a period where you have to be asking questions. You've got to be doubting, and you've got to be supported in things. You've got to have somebody that you can ask questions to. Mm-hmm. And I'm at the point now where the person being asked questions of more than asking the questions. Although when you preach and when the other guys get up there and preach like that, it's like, boy, you answer a lot of questions, but it also raises questions. Mm-hmm. And then I've got that book to go looking for some answers. And,
that's right.
And they aren't all in front of me yet. I've still got some more work to do, and that's exciting.
So you come to know the Lord. I'm assuming you got baptized by Pastor Jim, perhaps?
I was sprinkled as a Methodist, and then I got baptized on the right side of my salvation with Jim Holbrook, and that was at the old Riverside Baptist Church out in East Fort Myers.
Okay. Yeah.
Had to climb up the back.
Very familiar with that church. Yes.
Step into that little baptismal up there, and it was dark. And then
so you're baptized. You're growing now in your faith. What are some of the things that begin to happen as far as that sanctification process in your life, as well as opportunities to serve?
Well, one of the early things that happened was that after Marcia and I were both saved, we got married. And, at that point, we started building a Christian household, and we really wanted children. And for quite a few years, there were no children. And we had gone to doctors, and the doctors said, you're not likely to have kids. And so we kind of accepted that. And we even looked into adoption, and that didn't work. And then all of a sudden one day, Marcia told me, she said, I'm pregnant. And I said, are you sure? And she said, yeah, I'm sure. And so we ended up having a miracle baby. And, we went through that pregnancy, and it was really tough on Marcia. She was a couch potato for a while. She couldn't move. She had high blood pressure, and she had some medical problems with that. And then with the high blood pressure, she had to have an emergency C-section, and that's when Callie came along. And a little
early.
3 pounds, 6 ounces at about 30 weeks, 28 weeks gestation. Yeah. And Callie's just perfect now. I mean, she's a beautiful lady. Okay, she's young lady, Callie. She's a young lady. And so anyway, we went through that. And then shortly after that with Corey. And then your whole life changes. Then instead of just the two of you, and we did a lot of traveling, and we were teaching, so we were off in the summers and stuff, and we did a lot of traveling. And then with the kids, that kind of anchored us, and so we started putting more time into BMX for Corey and soccer for Corey. And then Callie was involved in the band at school, and she was a twirler. She was doing the rifles and the flags, and she's doing all that stuff. So we put a lot of time and effort and money into having those kids grow up into those things. And then now the kids left, they got their own families, and so we're at that empty nest stage. And so now we're babysitting grandchildren, and retired from teaching after 41 years.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, 41 years as
41
a
years
teacher?
And I was a teacher. I taught middle school, and then I quit teaching for a year, and I was burned out. I went into landscaping. I did landscape design, and learned how to do blueprints and how to do scale drawings and stuff. And had to be able to sell a job, had to talk to people, had to problem solve, think big picture, think three-dimensional, all that kind of stuff. And I didn't realize it at the time, but those were skills I was going to need later on after retirement from teaching. And then Marcia and I both are Golden Apple teachers.
Congratulations.
There's not many couples that are both Golden Apple teachers, and both of us got that. I got that in 1990. I was also Lee County Teacher of the Year that year. So I was recognized, for teaching skills. And I was a good teacher because I loved what I did, and I taught the way I wanted to learn. And so I had kids that did all kinds of strange projects and different ways of learning and stuff.
Now you've taught at church as well. Tell us a little bit about your ministry.
Right after Marcia and I got married at McGregor, then they asked us if we would start teaching a newlywed class. And so we started teaching that newlywed class, and a lot of those newlyweds are still, they're not newlyweds anymore, but they're still here teaching their own classes. And so anyway, we started a newlyweds class, and we did that for quite a few years. And then you don't have newlyweds for very long. Pretty soon they graduate and go off to other classes. And so then we moved into teaching our own Bible study class. And we were like 25 to 35 or something like that. And we built a pretty tight group of people, many of which are still here at church. And year by year, they just kept changing the little label on the box.
Kept moving up.
And now we're in the 72-year-old group. So we kept moving up that way. And I taught for 25 years in the Bible study.
Wow.
And realized that I was a student more than that. It would amaze me, Mark, when I would prepare a lesson for Sunday, and then I get into class and start teaching that lesson, and I do know, but things would just happen, just come out of me that it wasn't from me. It was the Holy Spirit
how God uses
working through.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to sound holier than thou or anything like that, but if you really let yourself be used by the Holy Spirit, amazing stuff happens.
That's right.
And we saw miracles happen in class. We saw healings take place. We went through a lot of difficult times, tragedies where people were lost in the family, things like that. But we held tight to Jesus, and so that was something that got us all through. And then I had a bunch of stuff happen that it was just time for me to step back from teaching for a while. And so I just told the class one Sunday, I said, this is my last Sunday. I'm not teaching anymore. And I stepped back. And Ron Opel was one of the students I had in class. And Ron, if you know Ron, he's a bear of a man, sweetheart, teddy bear, really, but he's a big man. And he was sitting in class, leaning back in his chair with his arms folded. And at the end of class, and we had class before church, so I had to finish up so we could get to church. And he would cross his arms, and he would say, Bob, I've got a question. Okay, Ron, what is it? And he would ask a question, and he asked hard questions. And so I would answer the best I could, and a lot of times it was the Holy Spirit leading me on that one because it was over my head. And so when I stepped back from teaching, Ron stepped up, and he had no thought of ever being a teacher. But there was a vacancy.
When you stepped down,
And he filled it. He stepped in. And he's an outstanding teacher. He's a country boy teacher. And the way that he goes about teaching is very different from my style, but I can learn from him. He's really a good teacher. And so I listened to him. And then Branko Pavicevic was teaching other classes, and Branko's class dissolved. And so then Branko and Ron started co-teaching the class, and so we would switch back and forth. And just recently we lost Branko.
Yep.
And so Ron has asked me if I would co-teach with him.
Back teaching again.
And so I'm back in it again.
Now, you have something that is really your passion as far as ministry, and that's leading our McGregor food pantry. Share briefly with us kind of how you took on the role as the director and a little bit of why that ministry so excites you.
Our food pantry here at McGregor is unique, I think, in a lot of ways. When we first started, it was really in a closet here. And like Barbara, one of our pantry volunteers now, was here then, and people would come and they'd say, I need food, and she would go to the closet, and she'd give them maybe 1 or 2 or 3 cans of food, and that was our food pantry. And so it gradually was starting to grow, and then they ended up moving from this building down to East Fort Myers on Riverside Drive, and had a nicer building. It was about 4,500 square feet with a warehouse section and a bagging section and a seating area for volunteers and a counter counseling area. And that's when Marcia and I first started volunteering, was there with Sherry Harmon. She was the director then.
Right.
And Sherry had built the pantry up just tremendously. It's really a small business.
Yeah, it really is.
It has money coming in from volunteers. We're not part of the financial part of the church as far as missions. We're not part of the mission budget. Right. We rely on people just donating in. And so people have been really generous with that. And God's blessed us richly. And so about 3.5 years ago, the building we were in on the river in East Fort Myers sold. And so Sherry asked Marcia and me if we would go looking for some other place to move to. And so we had maybe 6 months, to move. And so Marcia and I went to see the city council of Fort Myers and talked with them. And so they said, oh, yeah, well, we know everybody. We'll find you a place. Well, the places they were talking about were like out at the industrial park. And it's a nice building, but there's no people around it. Yeah. There's no houses. And we found a couple places downtown, but they didn't have enough parking, or they didn't have a big door where you could get pallets in and out. And so every place we found was the door just shut. And then we finally found a place on Fowler Street that had been a machine shop. And the real estate guy we talked to said it was available. We could, if we want to move in, the owner would make some changes to the building so it would accommodate us. And so we decided, well, let's go ahead and look into that. Well, about that same time, Sherry and Sam were really wanting to get out of the pantry ministry. For just one person doing that, it's a really big job being the director of that. And so Sherry and Sam took us out for lunch one day and said that they were going to step back and they wanted us to take it over. And so we said, well, how about if we be co-directors with you for a while? We do it 6 months, we'll do it 6 months, or every other week or something. And Sherry said, no. And so we said, well, okay, let's talk to Russell. And so Russell agreed to let us be the interim directors. And that was 4 years ago.
still going. I think we taken the interim
I think it's permanent
title off of there.
And so when we did that, then we just about that time we were making the move to this new property, and
big project.
It got to be a whole lot more complicated than it looked. First of all, we found out the zoning was wrong, and it was zoned commercial industrial, which is the lowest level of zoning, we thought. And then as we're trying to get the certificate of occupancy, the lady said, oh, no, there's one lower level, and that's for food pantries. And so we had to go through the city and meet committees, and we had to pay fees. We paid $17,000 to get fees through the city to get into that property. And the money was there. People donated out of their faith to keep the pantry going. And so we got through all those hurdles, and we opened up the new pantry. And at the same time that we signed the contract for the new property, the sale fell through at the original place. And so we talked to Russell, and Russell said, it's like if you ask a girl to a dance, but you don't really want to go with her, and then the girl you really want to go to breaks up with a boyfriend, but you've already asked the other girl. You got to go with the one you made a promise to. So that's how we ended up, and it's a great place to be.
It is a great
Fowler
place.
Street.
Tell us though why you are passionate about this ministry. Because it's hard work.
Yeah.
But yet you get more excited, and we only have a few minutes left here, but what really gets you?
I could go for an hour and a half.
We don't have an hour and a half.
I'm really passionate about it for a lot of reasons. One is that all the things that God put me through, with quitting teaching, doing landscaping, being an assistant principal, being a teacher, all those were skill building that I need those skills as the director of a big food pantry.
He was preparing you.
I didn't know he was preparing me. He was preparing me even before I was saved.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it until you can look back. It's easier to look back and see stuff than it is when you're in the middle of it.
That's right.
And so now I'm working with about 45 or 50 volunteers. We're all volunteers. I don't get paid for this either. But we're all volunteers that work there. And we're just a tight group. I mean, we love each other, and we're so different from each other. There are people that are really good people, and there's other people that don't want to talk to the clients coming in. They're really happy piling up boxes. And so it's
all
like
kinds of
all these different skills, and they all mesh together.
Talk real quickly about the size. Like, how many families are you ministering to, the amount of food, just so people can get a scale.
Since the pandemic, we really dropped off, and now we're starting to build back up again. And we are right now running about 500 families a month. That's about 2,600 individuals that are being fed every month. It's been steadily increasing now as the federal money, the government money, is starting to dry up. The more people are feeling the need, and our numbers are going up. We're considering an emergency food pantry. We're not a grocery store. So we want to help people through a rough time so they can get on their feet. Our counselors help with everything from locating jobs to helping their kids find eyeglasses to recommending people to come over for the clothes closet. We have a resource guide so our counselors aren't just getting the government paperwork done.
Right.
And then the most exciting part is that when they finish the government work, each counselor does it a different way, but they'll ask the client, are you attending church? Or, how's your spiritual life? Or how's your soul today? Different clients or different counselors do it different ways, but they will ask them about that. And we have salvations regularly occurring at that pantry. And it's like I almost want to put a bell out there to ring the bell every time, but you can't do that because you have people that just wanted to ring the bell. We want it to be sincere. Yeah. And we have people that don't speak English. We have people that are Hispanic people that are speaking Portuguese. We have people that speak Haitian Creole that come in, and a lot of times it's smiling and pointing and things like that. But it's just exciting to see people come in for food, physical food, and leave with spiritual food when they go out.
Yeah.
And it's an exciting place to be every week.
Yeah, that's neat. And if anybody wants to volunteer, they can contact the church, and we'll put them in touch with you. They can go through that process.
Right now, we really have enough volunteers, and we still have winter people coming back. But please have them call. We'd like to talk to them. We can put them on a waiting list. The clothes closet still needs volunteers.
They need volunteers.
We've been directing people that way that want to volunteer.
Yeah, that's just getting back up on its feet.
And it's open one day a week, and it should be open more often than that. So we'll work with that.
Good word. Hey, we're gonna wrap up, but I have to ask you, how long have you had your mustache? People know you as the mustache guy, right?
Yeah, handlebar mustache is, it gets a lot of attention. Yeah. I grew a mustache when I was teaching 8th grade science because I was only a few years older than my kids. And so I grew the mustache to look older. And then I was walking through a drugstore one day and I saw mustache wax for the first time. Oh. And I had already grown a brush mustache like Terry Thomas, English actor. And I looked at the wax and I thought, I could do that. and I bought it, I took it home and I tried it and I had a little bit of a curl. And I took a dare and I dared myself and I went to school the next day and the kids thought it was great. And so eventually it kept getting longer and longer and it got out really wide for a while and it's a lot shorter now. But when it gets wet, I look more like a catfish, so it
always looks good though, Bob.
When I had hearing impaired kids, I knew when the kids were talking about me because they would use their little fingers to make a curl. That was Mr. Fain. So.
I think that's a good point to wrap up this episode of Hear It Home. Thank you so much for joining us, Bob. And those of you listening, thank you for being a part of our Hear It Home podcast. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, I would encourage you to do that. Bob's going to go home and subscribe to the Hear It Home podcast. So when this one comes out, he'll be ready to listen to it on his podcast player, his phone, or maybe watch it online on the YouTube channel. But thank you for listening, and we'll see you back here in a couple of weeks, right back here at home.